welcome to today's panel on establishing a Middle East nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction free zone. My name is Dua Ahmed. I will be your moderator today. I'm a master's student from Columbia University, a recent graduate of NYU, and a youth activist with Nuclear Age Peace Foundation and its youth initiative Reverse the Trend. Nuclear Age Peace Foundation is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council and has been recognized as a peace messenger organization by the UN. As a half Moroccan woman, this issue is deeply personal to me. I hope to see a Middle East where the people live free from the shadow of nuclear weapons. And I've seen how the youth have made meaningful contributions to this work. To my right, I have Mohammed, and he has coordinated with today's panelists and with the IR Society to hold today's event. Mohammed, the floor is yours.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming and giving us your time. I know we started a little bit late, but I promise this is going to be good. We have excellent panelists here. I would like to introduce first El-Hajj Mohamedou. He's the first counselor for the Mauritania mission to the UN. They also had the former presidency of last year's conference on the WMD-Free Zone in the Middle East. On the farthest left, we have Mr. Amr Asamuddin. He's the counselor at the permanent mission of Egypt to the UN. Very active and has a reputation as an expert on this topic. On my right is Dr. Rahiro Kal-Sidhu. He's a professor at NYU SPS. He teaches the course on WMDs and non-proliferation. And giving closing remarks will be Dr. Ivana Hughes. She's the president of NAPF, the Peace Foundation, and she's also a member of the scientific advisory group to the TPMW. So I'll keep my statement very, very brief, and I'll say that towards the end of 2024, I was interning at the Saudi Arabia mission, and that was my first time learning about this conference. Ever since the end of last year's conference, I felt like the public sphere is not really engaged or aware of this effort on the diplomatic front. There are piles and piles of documents and declarations that mandate the establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone and a weapon of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East. There's the 1995 resolution, which was tied to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty's indefinite extension. There is also the 2010 action plan that came out of the NPT review conference, outlining practical steps to the creation of the zone. And much of the focus remains on nuclear weapons and the establishment of a nuclear weapons-free zone. This is by no means a novel concept. Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific are all regions that exist within nuclear weapon-free zones. And so I don't believe the Middle East should be any different. There is a moral, legal, political, and frankly a human rights imperative to realize the establishment of this zone. However, this zone is unique in the sense that its establishment would also include biological and chemical weapons. The Chemical Weapons Convention has a robust enforcement mechanism, the OPCW. The Biological Weapons Convention, however, has yet to enact a robust enforcement mechanism. So I think in that regard, it has an opportunity to make the region a prime location for an enforcement body, similar to how Vienna hosts the IAEA and other disarmament machinery. This would be a good opportunity to make sure that Europe doesn't have a monopoly on disarmament machinery. And that's it for the brief remarks.
Thank you, Mohammed, for your remarks. I will now open up the floor to the panelists by asking each panelist a question. They will have 10 minutes each to respond and give their general remarks. So first, Mr. Mohamedou, as Mauritania presided over the fifth session, what were the key lessons you took away from that role, both in terms of the diplomatic processes and in consensus building towards the WMD-FC outcome document?
Thank you so much. At the outset, I would like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to engage with you all. So, as president of the latest session, there is plenty of lessons we have learned, and we keep learning. On a daily basis as we engage and interact in this matter. But there is a main lesson, and that's why we all keep engaged in this process. That's the Middle East, and the participating states are very engaged and eager to achieve the goal of freeing the Middle East from nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, and to deliberate and implement the mandates of the 2019 resolution. So that's the key lesson we are. That's fuel our engagement to keep moving forward, and at the same time, there is some challenges. So that's also, I think, it's should be also considered. The challenges considered also to be a lesson learned from the past, and should be dealt with in the future. I think it's worth to highlight that with the success we have made thus far, or the achievement or the progress we witnessed since 2019, the absence of one of the Middle Eastern countries, namely Israel, is a significant and a challenging issue for us all. In 2019, when we all together launched the process for the first time, we had a political declaration that's laid down a set of principles and foundations for the conference, and there was an open-ended invitation to all parties to participate, including Israel, and there was a measure that conditioned the decision making by consensus. So there will be no free zone until we all agree on the foundations, and then and that's why it was mentioned that it should be a consensual process arrived at freely by members and states in the region. So I think I will finish here. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experience in that role. I will now ask Mr. Isamuddin. I want to ask you, how has the WMD-Free Zone initiative evolved, and how do you think its importance has grown over time?
Thank you, Dua, and thank you, Muhammad and Nuclear Peace Age, for having us today. Very pleased to be here. We had a very long day at the conference. We're at the stage of trying to look into its report, and this is a piece of publication that we share with the world after this 1 week of work in November every year. Why does it matter? I think there can never be a better news for the Middle East and the world than having weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. This is one of the situations where the Middle East is certainly not keen on claiming a status of exceptionalism. We don't want to be exceptional in any way when it comes to weapons of mass destruction. We want to be similar to the 5 existing regions, whether in Latin America and Central Asia and Southeast Asia. This is one of the things we want to be similar to the rest of the world. We know that we are exceptional in other senses, but this is one of the areas that we want to be truly exempted. Certainly, it is a good contribution to international peace and security. There's no doubt about this. It is a minimal level of confidence building among the countries of the region. If you want to speak about the prospect of peace, and this is a very complicated subject that we can discuss separately, but at least we know very well that we come from a region where war, conflicts, and tensions is something which is in abundance. It's happening very often in our region. But without weapons of mass destruction, at least there is an assurance that with all these conflicts, we don't have the will or the capability to wipe out each other. The second point is that as Egypt, and I think that most of the countries of the region, we believe that nuclear weapons are not an answer to security. Nuclear weapons are increasingly obsolete. And even just this year, let's look at the examples that we have in the world. We had a war between 2 nuclear-armed states in South Asia, India and Pakistan. They haven't used nuclear weapons against each other. We had the 12 days war between Israel and Iran, with direct targeting up into the depth of the capitals of each other. Nuclear weapons were not used. We have had a war in Europe for 3 years, with one of them the Russian Federation and nuclear weapon states, and the rest of Europe, where we have 2 other nuclear weapon states and the United States, and nuclear weapons were not used. So there are a lot of question marks about the effectiveness, even the economic viability of maintaining a nuclear arsenal, and whether they are an answer to security or not. It is an asset for nuclear risk reduction and prevention of nuclear accidents and incidents, and equally important, it can enhance the level of universality of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I think that Habib, he touched upon this. We have this on the specificity of the situation that we have one of the only 4 states around the world that are not party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is Israel. Israel has a status of ambiguity around its nuclear capabilities, where most reports are inclined to believe that they are of a military nature. They are not subject to the comprehensive safeguards agreements of the IAEA. They are not subject to the inspection regime of the international organization. So having a nuclear weapon free zone in the Middle East certainly adds to the universality of the NPT. This is one of the things that we have been consistently advancing at the UN, as well as at the review conferences of the NPT. Now, I mean, very few points on the history of the discussion on this. It is a very long and complicated history. We are almost speaking about more than 50 years of discussions in UN and outside, but let me highlight just few landmarks. 1974, Iran came with a proposal on establishing a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. And just to put things into context, this happened not with the current government of Iran. This was during the Shah of Iran, a very reliable and close friend of the United States, and without any adversarial relations with Israel. So this is the geopolitical context of where this happened. They looked at it as an equitable, a pursuit of an equitable security and collective assurance for everyone. Egypt joined the call in the same year. We took it, a couple of notches further, say that actually we wanted not just free of nuclear weapons, we wanted free of all weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, and nuclear. We table an annual resolution at the General Assembly to support the cause of establishing nuclear weapon in the Middle East. Regularly, it gets the support of the overwhelming majority of the member states, somewhere between 170, 180 member states. Until 2018, it used to be adopted by consensus, and then the consensus was broken. The United States votes between against and abstain. So in 2019, 2020, the last couple of years under the first Trump administration, the United States opposed the resolution, joined Israel in opposing the resolution. During the Biden administration, they moved to the abstention side. And then this was the first year where, again, the committee was looking into the proposal under the Trump administration, and the US is back to voting against the resolution. 1995, heirs of promise and hope in the Middle East, the Madrid process, the Oslo Accords, speaking about redefining the trajectory in the Middle East. So 1995 in the NPT review conference and indefinite extension, there was the very famous 1995 resolution that was one of the bases of the indefinite extension of the treaty, where they reiterated the collective support for the objective of establishing a nuclear weapon-free zone, and to agree later on further practical steps on how to make this happen. Where a lot of meetings happened, Lyon, in Geneva. It was supposed to take place in 2013, and it ended up actually collapsing. The US walked back on this. The conference did not take place. I'm just trying to simplify things. There are so many details between the lines, but the 2013 conference did not happen. We went to 2015 to the review conference. The Middle East was one of, if not the key reason of why this conference collapsed. We do not have any outcome documents. The US, Canada, the United Kingdom, they were not able to be part of an agreement of reiterating the support for establishing the zone and to take practical steps, including to put together a conference or a process. So after this almost 20 years of impasse, there was a proposal by Egypt that was endorsed by the Arab group that went to knock the door of the UN and suggested to establish this annual UN conference on establishing a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. That happened in 2018. Ever since, we had 6 sessions. There are a lot that can be said. I think we have the former presidency, Mauritania is in better position to speak about it. The current presidency, Morocco, on the first line also, they know it like the back of their hand. But what I can say is that the key highlight was that when we were trying to engineer this conference, we were trying to learn from all the lessons of the past and give no one any ammunition to repeat the criticism to previous processes. So this is a conference happening at the UN. Every country in the region is invited. Of course, Israel receives an invitation every year. Iran receives an invitation every year. Iran attends. Israel declines to attend. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council, who are the 3 co-sponsors of 1995, Russia, US, UK, as well as France and China are there. International Atomic Energy Agency, the OPCW and PwC. Everyone is expected to be in the room. It has a black and white in the terms of reference that it is to arrive at, to elaborate arrangements that are freely arrived at by the free will of the countries of the region. So which includes Israel, the Arab countries, and Iran. It is a consensus-based process on everything, starting from electing the president, agreeing on the agenda, the program of work, but also on elaborating the annual reports or any decisions that comes from there, and certainly in the negotiation process. It has formal reporting procedure, it has an annual report, so very high levels of transparency and sharing of information. The Secretary General, I think, of the UN on several occasions have been trying, and several other partners and friends trying to persuade Israel to come to the room, and also to the US that has been so far boycotting the conference to come to the room. I will not speak on behalf of both of them, but the part of criticism that we hear from both countries is that we do not think that this process corresponds to the principle of freely arrived at by the free will of the countries of the region, which is I personally cannot agree with, because it's a consensus-based process and everyone has an equal seat around the table. So you have to come and see whether actually it equitably represents everyone or not. This is one. 2 is that they are speaking about the evolution of the landscape of threats and risks in the Middle East, which is something we can substantively engage about. So whomever who wants to come to speak about things other than the Israeli nuclear capabilities or the accession of Israel to the NPT, nothing can stop them from doing so. If they want to speak about other sets of threats and risks from other countries, cases of non-compliance from other countries, this is the place where this should happen. Nevertheless, I think that the overall sentiment that we feel among the members of the conference so far, that the conference is a place for technical engagement and hopefully in the future for legal negotiations on a text, is not a political forum, is not a place to target countries or to scrutinize their positions and their policies about non-proliferation situations. Because we meet usually in the bottom floor of the UN, on the underground floor in Brooklyn. We always say that the right place to have this discussion is 1 floor up, where the General Assembly and the Security Council meet, or across the globe in Vienna, where the International Atomic Energy Agency scrutinize the non-proliferation obligations of states. But this needs to remain a technical and legal process, and otherwise it would erode its credibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting the importance and evolution of the WMD-FC. I will now ask Dr. Sidhu, for the students and emerging practitioners here today, how would you explain the significance of the WMD-Free Zone for the nuclear non-proliferation regime, and why might 2026 be a decisive year?
Well, thank you very much for the invite, particularly and from the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and to engage with all of you. Really, I'm grateful for this opportunity. I think in terms of, actors who might be bad actors for the failure of the NPT, there are no limitations of people or countries wanting to play the lead role. And I think if you look, for example, at the last two NPT review conferences, the Middle East was not one of those reasons why it kind of fell apart. There were other reasons, and in fact in the 2022 conference there was very much an agreement on the Middle East in particular, but there were other reasons why it did not happen and go through. So from that same logic, I would say, if you look at 2026, I think there are many other reasons why that conference may fail. One could be simply the absence of the United States, and that's a distinct possibility, or just the sheer indifference to that. Second, even if they are present, there could be tensions between them and Russia, or between them and China. So the Middle East could certainly play a role in that, and a disagreement on that is a possibility, and particularly given events that have happened this year, you can see that there is, perhaps Iran or others in the Middle East may be candidates for becoming the spoilers for 2026 in that context. And just precisely in that context, I might just want to connect to something that Amr earlier said, which is that absolutely the forum shouldn't be one for targeting countries, but if you read Iran's statement at this particular forum, you can see that it's particularly kind of targeting specific countries as well. And I mean, I'm not kind of justifying that in any way, but also saying that that is also the reality as well. So there's a couple of other things I might want to talk about before maybe suggesting what may be other ways that we can think of, leading this on beyond where we are at the moment. So first of all, even though this particular process was born out of the NPT, 1995 is the genesis, but very rightly pointed out, 1974, there was already this idea. But the connection between the two has never been very clear. There isn't, for example, a call to report back to the NPT, or kind of vice versa, to have in some ways the NPT connected to this process as well. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there as well. And second, which is probably more important, is the ground reality. The sheer absence and the situation in the region, particularly between Iran and Israel, and to see how this is likely to unfold and have an impact on this, in some ways is going to be seriously problematic as well. So with that in context, maybe I want to throw forward a few other thoughts and ideas, because the first of all is, why are we confining this only to the NPT, this BWC and the CWC? We also now have the TPNW, and many of the countries in the region are members of the TPNW, and frankly, countries that are not should be, which are part of the conference. And here I'm particularly thinking about Iran, which may be another way to try to kind of engage them through that TPNW process as well. Second, there's been an interesting discussion and deliberation on maybe going ahead with a treaty without, with the absence of Israel, and that is one thought and idea. But another idea may be to perhaps think about regional verification processes, and we can see a parallel of that in Latin America, which has not only Tlatelolco, but this very incredible agreement between Brazil and Argentina and Brazil on accounting of nuclear material. So can countries around that region start working in that sort of area as well? Third, I think a reference was made to confidence building measures, and that's really important as well. And I'm wondering whether we might want to look at what other regions have done. And I'm thinking in particular about the region that I originally come from, Southern Asia. And there are two agreements there which may be quite interesting to think of in the Middle East context, right? So one of them is a pre-flight notification of ballistic missiles. So it doesn't mean that you're giving up your missile program, but you're just trying to create some degree of confidence by announcing as and when you're going to do the pre-flight test notifications of that. The second, which is actually even more radical and perhaps more relevant to the Middle East, would probably be the agreement between India and Pakistan, which is called the Non-Attack on Nuclear Facilities Agreement. We've seen if there's one region where attacks on nuclear facilities has become the established norm, is actually in the Middle East. And so perhaps this could be one way to sort of try to go around that process as well. The third thing I'll probably say, and then I promise to shut up as well, is to sort of say, look at, again, our colleague talked about how one of the objectives of this conference and process is really to enhance peace and security in the region and contribute to that. This is one of the things, by the way, that Israel has been talking about as well. But they obviously want to front-end it, perhaps, in many ways. So is there a via media that we can think of where we can try to accommodate both of these contrasting perspectives, as it were? And one idea that sort of comes to mind is already this particular process of the Middle East Weapons of Mass Destruction Free Zone has talked about the need to enhancing regional and international peace and security in the second session. I'm thinking perhaps, and now there's also the existence of the working group, which is intersectional. Could that perhaps become a platform to revive what used to be the Arms Control and Regional Security Conference, or ACRS, between 1991 and 1993? And perhaps, so it could be perhaps done as part of that working group, so where you can discuss some of the peace and security elements and then maybe bring it into this process as well. That maybe the last time that conference happened, you had not only Arab states, but you also had Israel participating and a Palestinian delegation as well. And that may be another way to perhaps take advantage of the situation on the ground today and look at ways that we might want to think about different approaches to that, rather than following just that kind of traditional approach of saying we want to try and keep this as technical as possible, because once you bring in the politics directly, it is going to have a negative impact. But perhaps we can engage with the politics in a more nuanced way, perhaps. Let me stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sudhu, for your insightful remarks. I'll now open the floor to Dr. Hughes, who is president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, for her concluding remarks and her reflections.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dua. Thank you, Mohammed, for organizing this, and many thanks to the ambassadors and to Professor Sudhu for the really insightful remarks. I want to make three kind of general comments, and my first comment has to do with why this particular nuclear weapons free zone, or weapons of mass destruction free zone, is so important. And that's, of course, a fairly obvious reason, because we're talking about a region that has been volatile for quite some time. And while the ambassador is absolutely correct that we've seen these conflicts involving nuclear armed states that have not actually led to nuclear exchange or worse, we at the same time really have to recognize that when a region or states are involved either in tensions or in open conflict, those are actually also opportunities where an accident, a miscalculation, we're not just talking about a decision that is going to be made deliberately to use a nuclear weapon. We're also talking about fog of war. We're also talking about leaders literally having minutes. If you haven't seen it, watch A House of Dynamite. It's on, of course, it's not dealing with this region, but that's what we're talking about when we talk about nuclear exchange, when we talk about nuclear war. We're talking about minutes to make decisions. And that's what worries me so much in this region. And of course, because it's not just Israel, and Israel does have nuclear weapons, they may, but that's what we're talking about when we talk about nuclear exchange, when we talk about nuclear war. We're talking about minutes to make decisions. And that's what worries me so much in this region. And of course, because it's not just Israel, and Israel does have nuclear weapons. They may not, have the policy of ambiguity, but they have about 90 nuclear warheads. But it's of course other nuclear armed or nuclear weapon states that have had long involvement in the region. So I think it's important to really keep that in mind for why this particular project, this particular conference, this particular zone is so important. My second point has to do, and it's been alluded to a little bit, just that it really has been done elsewhere, and it's been done over the decades. I'm just going to give you a couple of the dates. The Treaty of Tlatelolco, which established a nuclear weapons-free zone in Latin America and the Caribbean, was established in 1967, so it's been quite a while. This is not a new idea. It's not something that we don't know how to do. In fact, it's an idea that technically predates the NPT, or at least the actual establishment predates the NPT. The subsequent treaties of the established nuclear-free zones were for the Pacific, the South Pacific, the Treaty of Rarotonga in 1985. That was very soon after most of those states even gained independence. So it was really, one of the first things they did as independent decision makers as states that were on their way to either joining the UN or being a part of the UN already. And then another 10 years goes by before the Southeast Asia nuclear weapons-free zone, the Treaty of Bangkok, and then right around the same time, African nuclear weapons-free zone is established in 1996, and then another 10 years goes by before the treaty for nuclear weapons-free zone in Central Asia. So we're a little overdue, 20 years. I mean, it's just, the timing is right. And I want to, as kind of separate but also very much connected as my third point, really emphasize what you said about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That is the treaty that is essentially trying to make the entire world a nuclear weapons-free zone. That's really the goal. And I did a little bit of math. I think you said, many of the countries in the region are part of the TPNW. They could do a much better job. So here's the math. At least for the ones, I'm going to talk about the Arab League states. So I'll leave Israel and Iran aside. But there are 2 states parties, 4 signatory states, 9 that are considered other supporters. So that's either voting when the TPNW was negotiated, or voting for resolutions in support of the TPNW. And there are 7 states that have not taken any direct action. And I think I see this entire project of getting rid of nuclear weapons as something that has to really come from all sides, right? So you can think of, for instance, the TPNW, the pressure on the nuclear armed states coming from the international community. You can also think of it as coming from inside those societies, inside those countries, with the general public putting pressure. Here, maybe there's a way where joining the TPNW for these states is going to also help move this process forward. So I think that would be my sort of general recommendation, and in the interest of time, I'll stop there.
Thank you everyone for your thoughtful remarks. I will now open up the floor for the interactive dialogue. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Please keep your questions brief, and we'll take them in batches of 3.
Thank you all so much for coming to speak to us. I was just very curious, in the absence of nuclear weapons and nuclear programs that are being developed in the region, how can
Thank you. We'll have it.
Thank you, Deja, for giving me the floor, and good evening to all the esteemed colleagues. I'm Samuel C. Counselor in Morocco's mission to the UN, and as you're well informed, Morocco is assuming the chairmanship of the sixth session of the conference this year. I have listened carefully to all the brilliant briefings that were given to us, and I just wanted also to share our humble perspective. First, the fact of the statement of Iran sometimes could be out of the context. I personally believe that at least we have Iran with us on board. At least, we hear from them. We know what are their concerns. As one of my brothers mentioned earlier, we still have one empty chair, which is also one of the main pending issues in the conference that we tried many times to convey to our Israeli partners, to listen from them, and just to associate them with us in the conference. The fact of adding the TPNW to the portfolio, it's a sovereign decision from member states, and believe me, the three of us are in the front line of, we are in the battlefield, and from what we feel is that, especially in this particular circumstances, within the disarmament machinery as a whole, what we need is just to ensure even millimeter gains, and not to put this vital process into the coma. Because that was our philosophy, that was our DNA, and that was our doctrine when we first took this presidency. And if you ask my brothers, just 3 or 2 years ago about having a joint contribution on behalf of the conference to the comprehensive study on nuclear weapon-free zones, the first thing that they will respond will be, are you dreaming? But this year, we were able, for the first time, to have a joint contribution of the conference to the comprehensive study, which the last edition of it was chaired in, I think, in 1976. We were able also to convene the first side event of the conference on the sidelines of the NPT Prepcon. Also, just to highlight and to share with the international community what has been done here, and where are we heading to, what are we doing inside. Just to summarize, the conference is here, it's a reality, it's a fact, we keep working on it. It's not about presidencies, it's not about, who's inside, but it's about the region. It's about the future of the humanity of all the persons living in this. I remain optimistic that one day we'll be all sitting together around the same table, and there comes a day, even with those millimeter gains that avoid us the paralysis, that we could one day reach out our objective goal, which is to clear the Middle East region from the atrocities of weapons of mass destruction. I thank you so much.
So, for the speakers, which speaker would like to start? If you want to start.
I can start. I really like the first question about how can you get the countries to give up their nuclear ambitions and feel elusively secure. And this was actually the spirit of the grand bargain of the NPT, is that in the 60s we will bring actually the nuclear weapon states. They're going to give you a very, very thick promise that they're going to give up on these nuclear weapons, which haven't happened. We're going to allow you to make peaceful uses of nuclear energy, all of you, from Gambia to Vanuatu to Egypt to France, everyone going to enjoy the benefits of nuclear energy. And on the other hand, everyone will have to commit not to receive or to send nuclear weapons to anyone, good or bad guys. So that was actually the deal. That we would not pursue nuclear ambitions because we feel secure by the fact that others are keeping their part of the deal. That first, that we eventually all of us will not have nuclear weapons. Second is that all of us are going to enjoy the benefits of peaceful uses. The problem is that this didn't happen after 50 years. more than 50 years. And this is creating a huge pressure on the non-proliferation regime. What's happening with Iran in the Middle East is a case in point. It's not the only one, is that countries are asking themselves questions. Is I am at the NPT, I am placing my nuclear facilities to inspection. We can discuss separately how effective is this inspection, what is being shared, what is not shared, but I mean, at least officially, I'm part of a regime that makes my facilities accessible, and I get an armed attack. So should I actually start to reconsider the points of departure where we're coming from about the whole regime or not? But this is not only happening in the Middle East. I mean, as you can, I think that you can agree with me that the world is going to a very wild place currently. So all these type of like very individualistic Spartan ideas will start to gain traction in different places in the world according to the security landscape where they live in. I am equally angry about the NPT. Very disappointed. We, as Egypt, we have invested a lot in that regime. We have been trying to advance, we're trying to protect this grand bargain. We're very disappointed that it's been 15 years now since this machinery produced a single piece of paper. I'm a big fan of the TPNW. I think it's a very beautiful treaty. It is more democratic, it's just, it's equitable, but it also have key challenges. One of the key challenges is that we do not have the nuclear weapon states in the room. Egypt, we're not party to the TPNW, but we vote in favor of each and every piece of text that supports the treaty. Nuclear weapon states are not in the room, so we're always concerned about whether this will turn into an assembly of like-minded states, because we all agree that nuclear weapons are bad, they should be prohibited, and we don't own them. But actually, how can we engage in a conversation with the ones who are in possession of nuclear weapons, but they are not in the room? And this was supposed to be the NPT, where they are in the room, but they are not necessarily responding positively to the expectations from them. Why the accessions to the TPNW in the Middle East is limited? I mean, in my view, there are a couple of reasons. The first of them is that, at least I'm speaking about the Arab states. Arab states, all of them are at the NPT. Arab states, 95% of them are at Arab states. Arab states, all of them are at the NPT. Arab states, 95% of them are at the CWC and the BWC, and Israel is at none. So the very legitimate question that they ask themselves, until when would we continue to take steps of additional contractual obligations and the other side is not showing any reciprocity? So TPNW is the same. We are at the place where we have the three guarantors and no one is able to make things move. So if we actually go to the TPNW, would that make things different? Maybe, I know.
Would you like to go?
Thank you.
I'm happy to. So thank you for, I think that always feels like the $1 million question, right? And as long as we accept what I would say, some people call it the theory of deterrence. It's not a theory. I'm a scientist. In science, the word theory is used in a very specific way. It's meant to describe a wide range of phenomena and to have decades of experimental support. That's just not the case here. We could call it maybe the logic of nuclear deterrence. So as long as that's the starting premise for the countries that have nuclear weapons, the next logical conclusion would be that everyone should have them, right? And then the next logical thing will be that we will be in a nuclear war before you know it. And in that case, it wouldn't be just those countries that engage in the nuclear exchange and the nuclear war that would be affected. The entire planet would be affected. Our climate would change, our ozone layer would get destroyed, not to mention people dying from the nuclear weapons explosions themselves and dying from radiation over a number of years. And some of these estimates are absolutely frightening. We're talking about billions of people dying just from the climate effects and basically a state of starvation for the entire planet. So I don't know. For me, it's a very easy answer because what we really are no longer talking about with these arsenals, with these weapons. This is not 1945 and one country has 3 bombs and uses one in the test in New Mexico and uses 2 over cities. We have 12,500 nuclear weapons in possession of 9 countries. Most of them far more powerful than the bombs that we used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We could literally destroy the world in 72 minutes. And I don't see how any national objective could justify that. And in fact, what we really do know in the Cold War, we had this mutually assured destruction. It was always, and it still remains, so MAD, or mutually assured destruction, it was always and it still remains SAD. It's self-assured destruction. There is no such thing as winning a nuclear war. There is no such thing as surviving a nuclear war. I mean, and so, again, going logical from one step to the other, the only logical thing is to eliminate all of these weapons.
Yeah, very briefly because it's been touched on a lot. Thank you, first of all, for those excellent questions. I think, on nuclear weapons, there's a sense that they're somehow magical. The minute you have them, your security is guaranteed. But as we've just heard, it didn't prevent these conflicts by neighbors who did not have nuclear weapons as well, right? And what we need to understand is that along with nuclear weapons, there were 2 or 3 other elements which have added to the perception of security. One is doctrines. How you're going to deploy or not deploy or use, no first use, etc. But second, really kind of important, is institutions where you can actually have discussions and dialogue. So I would argue that nuclear weapons would not have created this so-called long peace if you did not have the 5 permanent members in the UN Security Council, if you did not have NATO and Warsaw Pact talking to each other, right? So you need these institutions, you need these instruments for people to engage. That's what the security is built on. And the fact that they're trying to manage nuclear weapons is part of it. So the other way to think about this is, can we envisage security looking at the other institutions, dialogue, without nuclear weapons? That's the way to think about, how this could happen. And in fact, what is happening is the presence of nuclear weapons is emboldening countries to carry out conflicts that they wouldn't otherwise necessarily do, knowing that there's not likely to be a retaliation. And so that's actually made it much more dangerous. Very briefly on the NPT, because I would love to hear some more questions as well, is you're absolutely right. It is a very big betrayal. But since we're in the United States, you had 2 conferences now fail in sequence, which has never happened in the history of the NPT. Is the 3rd failure going to be a 3-strike out? Because if that happens, then you're likely to see a lot of countries either not just showing up for the NPT or just walking away. Not that they're going to build nuclear weapons, but simply saying this is a waste of time. And I'm very assured that they will probably move to the TPNW. And even there, by the way, on the TPNW, to the point of the nuclear weapon states not being there, there's been a very solid approach, particularly by foundations like yours and others, to the umbrella states, NATO countries in particular, who are under the nuclear umbrella. They are feeling a lot of pressure by the populations to get rid of the umbrella. And that may be one way to then challenge this sort of concept of deterrence as we have it, and come from the bottom up there as well. But it requires the empowering of all of you here to take it forward as well. I'm looking at other questions there as well, but yeah.
The second thing, there are constant calls for Israel to join the TPNW and the NPT. Totally understood. But I think that one of the reasons that civil society throughout the years, including the Middle East Treaty Organization, have called for such a conference, such as the November conference, the year conference on the zone, was because we believe that that was the way to bring Israel into the NPT and the TPNW. And the reason for that is because it's not more important for the Middle East to disarm than any other zone. We are not more dangerous than any other zone. We are just like all the other zones, alright? However, there are 9 nuclear arms states. And in these 9 nuclear arms states, most of the states have a nuclear adversary that needs to sit at the table with them in order to find ways to disarm. And they are as important as the Middle East. However, Israel doesn't have yet a nuclear adversary. I mean, if we continue like this, we will. But still we don't. What Israel does have is a region that Israel doesn't feel safe at, which is why the way to bring one of the 9 nuclear arms states to the table was through a regional agreement. And it's as important to bring all 9 nuclear arms states to any kind of table. And my last sentence is, it will happen only if civil society will start working with the concrete plan, just like we did on the WMD-Free Zone, without believing that not just that it's possible, but within our responsibility, without starting working together towards bringing all nuclear arms states to the table, it will be very hard for us to bring these to the table. And really, my last remark, the WMD-Free Zone is not just about disarming Israel. It's about creating a zone where there's a layer of verification. It's not going to be like any other zone, because in this zone, for the first time, we're dealing with all 3 kinds of weapons, and it's not just unique, it's groundbreaking, and thank you very much.
Would we like to start from the right to the left?
I think there were a couple of questions.
If you have any more questions.
There were a couple.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Waleed, and your name? Omar.
First of all, thank you for coming. I'll now mention something which is very important, mentioned by Ambassador Ham and confirmed by Dr. Ivana at the beginning, that during the recent contemporary conflicts that took place, for example, between Israel and Iran, you mentioned that although they have nuclear weapons, but they were not used. Does this mean that there is international, external actors have the power of giving the permission of giving the permission of using those weapons, and those countries, they are not more than hosting countries storing those weapons, and who has the power to give the permission is totally a different third party? And if so, does those or these international actors have also the same in establishing a open free zone?
The 2 players in the region with the least amount of economic dependence on other players in the region are Iran and Israel. So kind of like an economic integration and regional dependency on both of these players help provide nuclear free zone.
Do you want to start from the right?
Sure, I'm happy to start. Thank you all for the great questions. Thank you, Sharon, for your excellent comments. I completely agree with you that in some sense NPT is still the place where we bring everybody. What I do really think is that the TPNW is, I see it as an extension of the NPT. I see it as clarifying Article 6 obligations, which are admittedly vague, and perhaps that was the point from the very beginning, but it really has been 55 years since the NPT entered into force. And I think that's, I really appreciated your comment about this being a sort of democratic treaty, and I think that's important. My view is that sometimes people talk about the TPNW and say, oh, it will be the last step. And in some sense, I agree with that. But I also think it's the first step in the sense that it establishes what it is that we're trying to get to. And if we can agree that that's what we're trying to get to, clearly there has to be a table, whether it starts with US and Russia, who by the way have 90% of the world's nuclear arsenals, right? So it's different to say, you know, US and Russia are going to keep their 5,500 approximately nuclear warheads, while everybody else is now supposed to go to zero, you know, starting from 90 or 150 or wherever they are currently. So, you know, what does that table look like? I really think is very important, whether that's a table that happens in phases and steps. I do think that the US and Russia, I mean, they have an immediate task with extending the New START treaty. That's like really low-lying fruit, but they should be doing something about that. And if that can be achieved, whether there's a way to keep moving in the direction towards zero. And then what's the moment where you also bring in China? I mean, China, for the moment, China has the first use policy, far fewer weapons than the United States and Russia, but China has this slope of increasing their arsenal that's different and higher than anybody else, and I think that's they're an important player. And at what point do the countries with a couple of hundred nuclear warheads each or less, at what point, and how do you address, in some sense, going back even to the very first question, why does a country have, or a state, have nuclear weapons? What is it that these weapons are doing for them, at least according to their analysis? The one that personally, and I'll just be honest, drives me crazy is France. I just not see who is going to attack France. I don't see it coming from, you know, Russia. I don't see it coming from China, certainly not from the United States or the United Kingdom. I mean, it's literally a symbol of power and prestige and some, you know, effort to maintain, you know, their colonial kind of status of being someone that we should really pay attention to. I think it's preposterous. I think, you know, and the UK too. I mean, I think both of these countries should just get rid of those weapons. I mean, nuclear weapons in Europe are like, Europe is really small. If you look, I mean, Israel is really small too, but all of these things, like if you look like these, they're just going to be destroyed. Anyway, I'll stop there.
That's a region that could do with a nuclear weapon-free zone.
Yeah, absolutely.
but also, I mean, you know, I think France is probably going to be the last country to give up nuclear weapons anywhere in the world. You know.
But that says something about the incentives
exactly.
and the thinking.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, just a couple of very quick responses. One on the NPT, and you're absolutely right. It is relevant as long as the P5 are there. There may come a time where, and it'll be very interesting to see actually next year whether the United States shows up or not. And then you might have a very, very different kind of dynamic, you know, working through that as well. The second is, you know, again, you're absolutely right about the 9 nuclear weapon states, or the states with nuclear weapons as they're called. But there is, as of now, no mechanism to bring them together. Partly because of the myth of the NPT, that you have these 4 states clearly with nuclear weapons, but because they're outside, there's no way, because you don't want to legitimize it, even though everybody knows that they have, and there's almost a quasi, you know, de facto recognition of all four of them. So how do you start that dialogue would be very, very interesting and even more challenging, because already you can see China sort of saying, we're not getting into the bilateral until you guys come down to our level. And China is already at another level than the other, four countries. I completely agree with France and Britain. There's simply no reason whatsoever for that. So,
Thank you.
We're really running out of time, and we're mindful of that. Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Article 6 prohibits the transfer of nuclear weapons to any other country, any non-nuclear state. Yet, last time I looked, the U.S. has nuclear weapons or sites in 5 other countries. And I had once asked the British ambassador about the NPT and the obligation to abolish nuclear weapons ultimately. And he said, no, the NPT permits us to have nuclear weapons and it's legitimate. End of story.
No.
So how do you deal with mentality like this?
It's a great question. One, I believe that was already answered. Article 6, yes, gets violated every year that passes without good faith negotiations happening. That is why the review conference is happening next year. So I want to say I'm so sorry, and I apologize for keeping everyone up until this hour. Our diplomats have a very busy day tomorrow and the day after especially, so please, I'm wrapping it up. Grab some sandwiches before you leave. Shake hands, get to know each other. Yes. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
My promise.